Well, now I want to talk about conceptualizing the mix. It's important to know where you plan to go with the mix. We've got all these elements. We've got our drums. We have keyboards. We have some guitars, bass. We may have some effects where you have these little sounds like a dog barking or rain or thunder. How to make the reverb sound better. What to do with the delays. You got delays, but where do they go in the mix? Who's the ultimate listener? Is it going to be on a website? Is it for this web listening? So how much do I need to worry about the bit depth? Or is it going to be on the radio? Do I need to make a really pumping mix for the radio? Do I need to make a short mix? Do I have to make several mixes? So what I'm saying here, we must understand what to do with the mix. Now we also have to get the arrangement in our head. So I let the arrangement be my guide. Like if I get a mix where it's quiet in the beginning and then there are vocals coming up in that first verse and there isn't that much music and it builds up further as I go along, that's my guide. I try to make sure I don't have too much happening in the morning, in the beginning of the track, and so much happening after that. You want to make it so it builds up like a daytime, from morning to mid-afternoon to the nighttime at end. It must have a beginning and an end to a mix. It's very important for you to arrange it in a style that makes it build up and get it so that the actual listener gets, oh yeah, I understand where you're coming from. If you're doing something that sounds like Jay-Z or sounds like somebody else, you want to make sure that this mix is within the genre you're trying to get approach, whether it's going to be hip-hop or neo-soul or R&B or rock and roll or even heavy metal, some type of mix, or sort of a metal rap mix. So you've got to understand your audience and understand how you're going to get from the tracks you have, and we're going to go from there. And it's important to know every track. You got to make sure every track is produced properly. Now, if I'm producing it myself, I know all the vocals are going to be in tune. I know the drum part's going to be just the right loudness. It's going to be perfect, recorded just the way I want to have it. So when I get to my mix, I don't have to correct anything in the mix at all. But if you're working with a producer, you need to get with the producer and understand what does he want to do. And now before I start, if I'm trying to get something going on, I'm going to set up everything on a mixing board. I'm going to start everything up. I'm going to get some sort of EQs going up. I'm going to make sure I've got my sends and returns for effects I want to use. Particularly once I know the genre of the music and who's going to listen to the tracks, I know, okay, it's going to be rap, I need to have this. It's going to be rock and roll, I've got to have that. It's going to be classical, which I've done several times for several artists. I know what to do to give it what it needs to be done. So I need to make sure the tracks are ready. But make sure also that my levels are set within my effects, where it's going to be reverb, chorus, a flange, or a delay, or whatever I'm going to use. And set my mix up first before I get started. And start to get my ideas in my head about where I plan to go from the beginning to the end of the mix. It's very important to do that. Now, once I get these ideas together and I get a good concept going on, I also want to, sometimes I might get a CD. Particularly if I'm going to do a mix, it's going to take a little while to do. I'll get a CD and sit down with a CD of several of the latest, let's say rap song, I'm doing a rap mix, or some of the latest or some of my favorite mixes from some of the top groups I might like, so I can get a rough idea and listen to these mixes and get a good idea of what's going on. And then I'll go back and listen to the track I have already. I'll keep the levels just right, not too loud, not too low, and listen to the mix over and over what we have. Just a regular basic mix of the music I have. And formulate my ideas from what I'm listening to. So when I get a rough mix to listen to, once I listen to that rough mix, I get a direction for where I want to go with my mix. And it makes it easier for me to understand and imagine the final mix. So I want to make sure I imagine this final mix as being, ooh, this should go here, and the kick drum should be this loud. And when it gets to the chorus, a little bit louder. Or make that snare snap more in the chorus and back to a regular snare in the verse. Make the hi-hats go from left to right sometimes, You have to hear these things in your head. You got to imagine the mix. You must be creative sometimes, and sometimes you don't need to be creative on some tracks. Some things, well, the maracas could be here, or the timbales could be here. Or just this background vocal could be like this, and just widen it some more here and there in certain spots. But a mix is almost like painting a picture. You've got the foreground, the background, the stuff that's really somewhere between the middle. So you got the foregrounds right back here. It's the We got the vocal right there in the foreground. It's coming out at us big. And the background is, could be the keyboards and some of the percussion drums. Other drums are right there behind the foreground. So it's like putting a painting together. We got the sun on one side here, the beach and the sand. And sometimes you might see something on the beach. You might see that little crab here, or you see a seashell here. Music and art are the same thing. But you have to conceptualize what you hear and paint that picture for your listener as well. That's very important for you to do that. That'll help you to understand, well, wait a minute. I want to go from here to there. And so you need to hear what that viewer's going to do. Hear what that chorus can do to the track. Understand, in case you want to fatten his vocal up, I might widen it up. I might put some sort of pitch change device and have a little bit here, a little bit here on left and right. And it sounds like it's wider. You might want to use auto-tune in the backgrounds and make them sound thicker, have that cool little sound to it that's so big today in today's music. So you must understand the concept of the arrangement, the listener, and listen to a rough mix to get a good direction so you can imagine what your final mix will be like. Now, working through the mix, you have to keep aware of your pace. Don't get tied up in detail. Like, I'm going to spend a half hour just doing a snare drum. Don't do that. Don't spend a half hour just doing the vocals. Get some of the basic stuff going first. I build from the bottom up. I will build up from the first drum. Then I'll apply the snare drum. I go bass drum to snare drum. I start with my basics, see? I get a balance between those two, where they have this symbiotic relationship where one needs the other. It's a boom, bap, boom, bap, boom, boom, bap. They need each other so much. And so it has to be this link between two of them where they help each other to grind it out. It's almost like a wheel in the song that beats a wheel moving around in the song. Then there's a hi-hat on top of it, getting more complement. So I want to build it up somewhat. Build my mix up from the drums. I add the bass. I'll add more stuff to it. I start my basics. And I work to a similar mix reference track. So that means I may have another track I'm listening to by some other artist. I will go back and reference that track sometime. I may work on this beat for a little bit. I'll stop, clear my head for a second, then listen to that track in my iPods or somewhere else in the room, or pull out a little beat-up CD player and listen to that track and get an idea, okay, make sure I'm sticking to my gold. Make sure I'm planning to head in that direction. So I listen to my reference track to get the proper idea on how I want to head out this track. So get your concept together, and then you can build your mix.